Hi, welcome back to another video. And apologies for not uploading as frequent as I used to towards the beginning of the year. There's been a lot of things that's been going on recently, and it has been quite a struggle to upload as frequent as I usually do. So my uploading might become less active as it usually is. But anyways, what I'm going to be talking about today is what I saw on Twitter, Twitter, which caught my attention. I became very interested, which was Doug Mastriano teasing a run for the Pennsylvania governor race, next year's governor race. Now, if the name Doug Mastriano doesn't sound as familiar to you as some other politician names, that is because Doug Mastriano has been out of the political eye for quite some time, ever since his governor loss in 2022. Yes, governor loss. He was the Republican nominee for Pennsylvania back in 2022, and he lost by quite a margin, actually double digits. And it's why Doug Mastriano teasing another governor race is so alarming to Republicans and also very exciting to people like me. Because if Doug Mastriano enters the race, it will be interesting to see if he has any Republican challengers. As you can see, Shapiro won this race by 14 points. As of right now, really there isn't anything official in this race. We're still a year and a half away here. Not even the governor, Josh Shapiro himself, who won the election back in 2022, has even announced his candidacy, which I assume it will. Obviously, the Democratic primary will be very, very boring. And not interesting because Josh Shapiro is a very popular governor, and no Democrat in his mind are going to be challenging him in the primary. It wouldn't make any sense. The DNC wouldn't allow it. So Josh Shapiro will cruise in the nomination very easily. However, we've seen also some others. Bob Casey has, announced that he's not going to be running. But I think the Republican primary, right, is going to be very interesting because we are going to have a field, or maybe not, just a couple people who are possibly going to run to try and take down the very popular governor who possibly wants to run for president in 2028, or maybe, do something else. But I think he probably has presidential ambitions for the presidency. But it will be interesting to see who the Republicans nominate to go against this very, very popular governor. I believe he's like within the top 10 with an approval rating. He's up there with like Andy Beshear, all those popular governors. So it is going to be interesting who Republicans nominate to try and take down Josh Shapiro, if they put in any effort at all. If the RNC pushes money towards this candidate, if they try to take down Shapiro at all, if they put in any effort whatsoever. My prediction so far, obviously, right, Josh Shapiro has momentum. He's probably going to win. Whoever the Republican nominee is going to be, which as of right now is very uncertain, we don't know. There's a lot of names being thrown up in the air right now. A lot of candidates, or a lot of politicians that could be this nominee. We have Stacey Garrity, Pennsylvania State Treasurer. We have Scott Markin, who is a state senator. And we also, again, we have Doug Mastriano, who ran against Josh Shapiro in 2022. And lost by 14 points. I can actually not only pull up the margins, but I can show you the amount of votes he lost by. In 2022, Doug Mastriano ran for the governorship. And he was a very, very weak candidate. Because at this point, January 6th was still very relevant. January 6th at this point was only a year ago. And it was still on the minds of many, many voters. Most especially Democrats. Who were still frustrated by what happened, and they want to make their voice heard. There was also abortion, which was also a top issue at the time, along with January 6th, the unpopularity of Donald Trump and his nominated candidates, and Doug Mastriano just happened to be one of those candidates that Donald Trump pushed for, and he was able to win the nomination, and he lost by historic margins in the general election. Because not only was Doug Mastriano a weak candidate, but he had several things within this election that were political baggage for him. For example, he was there on January 6th. Yes, the January 6th that was still on the mind of many voters, because at this point, January 6th was only a year ago. And there were several footage. There were people coming out that were saying that Doug Mastriano was at January 6th. He participated in it. He wasn't there. He may have not done anything illegal, but he was still there. And that was not a good look for him. And of course, Doug Mastriano did not condemn January 6th or Donald Trump or anything like that. And the voters soured on it and elected Josh Shapiro by an historic 14 points, a double-digit win. Now, I think if the Republicans were able to push forward a candidate that wasn't as weak as Doug Mastriano, if Donald Trump endorsed a candidate that didn't have as much political baggage as Doug Mastriano did, I think Republicans would probably do so much better here. Maybe Shapiro wins it by 5 to 6 points, instead of 14. However, I still think Democrats would have won Pennsylvania for how good of and strong of a candidate Josh Shapiro is. And it's again why I still think he is probably going to be winning here in 2026. Because Josh Shapiro is a very popular governor. He has a strong approval rating. He's very popular within the Democratic Party. And he's a strong speaker. He is a strong candidate to, run up for governor. He's probably going to win. Obviously, he's probably not going to perform as well as he did in 2022. I guess it does depend on, who the Republicans choose for the candidate. If it isn't Doug Mastriano, I think that Josh Shapiro is not going to win by 14 points as he did in 2022. I think he's probably going to win by maybe 7 to 8 points, but again, it all depends on the candidate. Obviously, if it's Doug Mastriano, then we could be back near those margins. Maybe he wins by 11 to 12 points. Obviously, it depends, if voters even care about January 6th anymore, which in my personal opinion, I don't think they do. I don't think they do. You saw Democrats constantly campaign on January 6th as a way to use it against Donald Trump and to try and tank him in several of those swing states. And it didn't work. It didn't work. Donald Trump won the swing states that Democrats were pushing all those negative anti-Trump ads. I don't know where Democrats were pushing those constant anti-Trump ads about January 6th, about everything Trump did, overturning Roe v. Wade, everything that was negative about him. And it didn't work, right? Donald Trump won Pennsylvania by over 1.5, 1.7%. He won Michigan, he won Wisconsin, he won Georgia, he won Arizona, he won Nevada, all states Biden won just 4 years prior. Just 4 years prior when Donald Trump was actually president, right? Biden won all these states. Obviously not easily, right? Very, very close margins here, especially Wisconsin. But still, those were all states Biden won. And those were all states Harris lost. And obviously, if Biden were to run again, if he didn't drop out, which actually was a year ago today, this result would have been much worse for the Democrats. Because what we were seeing in July of 2024 were that Biden's internal polling was that Trump was going to have a 400 electoral vote victory here, or electoral college victory. And I think that Harris coming in, campaigning, I think that she, took a huge chunk away from what Trump's victory would have been. But regardless, Trump still won. And now Democrats have to really come up with a way here, to try and win those voters back. Voters that voted for Trump in Pennsylvania and in Michigan, too. These were damning states. Michigan was a state that Trump won back in 2016. Biden took it back in 2020, and now Trump has won it again in 2024. However, both Biden and Trump winning this state by a very close margin. Trump winning it by 1.4, and Biden winning it by 2.8. So obviously Biden had much more of a bigger performance here in 2020, but that's only because, right, you had a huge voter turnout in 2020, and in 2024, less people showed up. And there was a huge amount of people on the Democratic side that didn't show up at all, right? Biden got 81 million votes. Kamala Harris got 75 million. So it wasn't a good look. It wasn't a good look. And Pennsylvania is going to be very important in 2026 because it will show where the Pennsylvania voters are at this point in time. 2022 was so interesting because it really showed that, Pennsylvania voters at that time were still anti-Trump. They heavily rejected an anti-Trump candidate. And it'll be very interesting to see where Pennsylvania is at in 2026. And obviously, again, even if Doug Mastriano is the candidate again, I don't think he's losing by 14 points. I think most he'll win by is 12. Most he'll win by is 12. And that's because I think that, the average probably could be 8. The closest he could get is maybe 5 points. I don't think Doug Mastriano has a single chance. But I think he'll perform much better if he's the nominee against Josh Shapiro. If there is this political rematch within Pennsylvania politics, and I think Doug Mastriano is going to perform very much better than he did in 2022, only because January 6th is no longer relevant. Nobody cares about it anymore. And I think there are a lot of issues that were hurting Doug Mastriano in 2022 that will no longer hurt him in 2026. Obviously, I don't think any Pennsylvania voter is going to be caring if Doug Mastriano was at January 6th in 2021, because it will be 2026, and there are going to be much more issues that are on the mind of voters in 2026 than just the January 6th Capitol attack that happened on the final days of Trump's presidency. Obviously, I think that probably the issues are definitely going to be affordability and stuff that have nothing to do with January 6th. And I don't think it will be a good talking point for the Democrats. So, yeah, I think Doug Mastriano will not have much political baggage as he did in 2022. And it's why I think he'll perform much better than just minus 14 points. Regardless, I still think Doug Mastriano is a very weak candidate, and I think he's going to lose still by a big margin. Maybe not by 14 points, but I think it could be, again, I said most would be 12. The average maybe, 8, and then the least would be 5. Even 5 is bad. 5 points is bad. So yeah, Doug Mastriano is going to be a very weak candidate if Republicans nominate him. But again, there are still other candidates that could be chosen, right? There's still a lot of time. We have a year and a half to go. We have Stacey Garrity, we have Scott Martin. All these people declined, and we still have publicly expressed interest. We still have a lot of, candidates to look at here to see if they run, to see who declines. We still have, some Republican representatives who maybe they don't want to run for re-election because their House district is going to get gerrymandered, or, it's not looking good for them. So they decide to run for governor, and maybe they have a shot at that, which they probably wouldn't. But they'd be a much stronger candidate than Doug Mastriano. So it will be very interesting to see who runs, if it's Doug Mastriano, if we have this political comeback between Josh Shapiro and Doug Mastriano. As of right now, it's really uncertain. I'm not sure, but it's possible. It's very possible Trump comes out and endorses Doug Mastriano. And with this tease, sorry, I don't know why the spectrometer is up. With this tease, I think Doug Mastriano has ambitions to run again, and I think he believes that he has a much better chance because President Trump is in the White House. Which, I probably disagree with, because it's Donald Trump, right? The Republican incumbent party is obviously not going to be performing very well in the midterms, but still, we have a year and a half to go. Much could happen, stuff to shake up, much more candidates to come in, and with that, we'll see what happens. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.